Tonight in the arena, and Coulter unleashes on liberal mobsters and their evil, evil ways. American taxpayers, deadly enemies, assault weapons, well, they're all connected, you know. But how? Well, Mark Steyn joins us to explain all. And finally, we risk life and limb to bring you something so controversial it's actually gotten people decapitated. Well, don't you lose your head, because there's all that and more tonight in the arena. Don't touch that dial. Hello, good evening, and welcome. You have just entered the arena. I'm Michael Coren, and thank you for joining me. I'm offended, therefore I am. The rallying cry of the censorship-obsessed throughout the world. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, but at this point in history, the campaign to silence you, me, all of us, is led by a disparate and, at first glance, unnatural coalition. Muslims, gays, feminist zealots, socialist radicals, strange bedfellows, especially if the gays and the Muslims are in the same bed. Not all Muslims, not all homosexuals, not all on the left, of course. Mind you, there appears to be something intrinsic and inevitable about the censorship fetish within Islam and socialism. Now look, I've got no illusions here. There are those on the conservative right, those who are Christian, who want to tell you what to say and when to say it. But they tend to be the exception to the rule, whereas the lefties really like the rules, don't they? Look, I'm Catholic. I'm pro-life. I believe marriage is the union of one man and one woman. I believe parents, and not the state, have the right, nay, the duty, to educate and raise children. I believe Israel, the Jewish state, is a beacon of decency in a morally inelegant Middle East. I believe that freedom and liberty triumph over regulation and control. I believe in values and virtues. I believe that changing with the times is a dumb and dangerous thing to do. Would you have asked a German in 1935 to change with the times? Think about it. But I also believe in you. Yeah, in you. And thus believe that even if you disagree with me, disagree vehemently and passionately, your voice has to be heard and your views respected. Now, all I ask is that you have the same regard for me and mine. If what I say offends you, well, watch something else. Hey, it's what conservatives have been told for 40 years now, every time they've complained about immorality or pornography on TV and radio. If you don't like it, switch channel, don't listen. Then, of course, the media party and the establishment politicians try to prevent conservatives and people of faith from having their own channels and stations. Oh, hypocrisy, liberalism is thy name. If you decide to watch, if you do decide, join the debate, be part of the conversation. The only thing worse than a closed mind is an empty head. Don't be frightened, don't be scared of listening to what people with a different point of view have to say. The left have a mantra, a phrase they throw at conservatives over and over again, particularly over social and ethical issues. What are you afraid of? Well, comrades, what are you afraid of? And they are afraid. I mean, those who can't take the heat used to run away to sea. Now they run away to the CBC. Now, beyond the cult of censorship in the media are those grotesque human rights commissions and their coven of controllers. You've all heard the anecdotes about these moral gargoyles, unqualified, unaccountable, uncaring fanatics who, in the name of their freedom, want to eliminate yours. Now, I confidently expect that they'll try to punish me, because punishing is their business. Think about this for a while. Human rights commissions, hate crimes units, bias crimes units, radio and TV commissions. Do you feel that we live in a country full of hatred, racism, sexism, bigotry? Well, I don't. I've lived half my life in Canada, and I find Canadians to be an invincibly fair, friendly, kind people. Do you think you need to be monitored all the time, told what to think, read and watch? No, neither do I. Which is why here on Sun News, here on the arena, we're going to explode the padded room of political correctness and allow air and, yes, sunlight into the body politic and the Canadian public square. As I said at the beginning, the crazies out there live by, I am offended, therefore I am. We say, speak your mind, listen to others, trust Canadians, and cherish freedom. I am Michael Coren, this is the arena, and you are in for one hell of a ride. Oh, and one last thing. God bless Canada. Okay, he's in the pay of international Zionism. He's a running dog of American capitalism. He's evil. The left say he's smelly. Yes, it's Mark Steyn. Oh, and he happens to be my friend and arguably the most perceptive journalistic voice in the modern world. Welcome to the debut of The Arena, Mark.
Hey, great to be with you, Michael. Honor to be here on your new show, and put me down for the 25th anniversary show.
Ah, wonderful stuff. Now, here's the book, because we need to plug people's books. I'm an author. After America, Get Ready for Armageddon by Mark Steyn. It's available well, is it available everywhere, Mark? Because you've had some problems with implicit censorship, haven't you?
It is actually available. I believe it's actually legal in Canada, and my friend Heather Reisman at Chapters Indigo has got it all out on prominent tables, I'm assured, and Heather and I will be doing something in Toronto in a couple of weeks' time.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I know there was a bit of friction at one point, but she's a friend of mine, so I better not say too much. Now, the thesis of the book, After America, because America was the last, the only hope left for you and others who supported your point of view. You're now saying that's all over?
Well, in America alone, my previous book, I argued that basically most of the rest of the Western world had adopted a defective business model that was an existential threat to some of the oldest nation states on the planet, including the one I'm in. I'm in London, the capital of the former dominant power. In the last couple of years, the United States has signed up for pretty much the same program as the rest of the West, but supersized. And when America slides off the cliff, it tends to land with a much bigger thud than Iceland or Ireland or Portugal or Greece do.
Mm-hmm. So what can we look forward to? That's a severely inappropriate way to put this, but what can we look forward to in the next 5, 10, 15 years of American foreign and domestic policy?
Well, according to the IMF, China will become the dominant economic power on the planet in the year 2016. Now, I don't think that's just a change in the league tables, like when Atlanta overtakes Heathrow as the world's busiest airport. I think that's one of those half-millennium shifts. It's an end not only to 2 centuries of Anglophone dominance by America and Britain, but going back to Italy and the Netherlands before it. I think this is a much bigger shift. The dominant economic power on the planet will be a communist politburo with a peasant population, no genuine market, no human rights, no property rights, no intellectual property rights, no free speech. The idea that this is just a modest technical recalibration of the global hit parade and life goes on, I think is ridiculous.
So what would that mean, though, to the... I don't disagree with your premise here at all, but what would that mean to the average North American? There are some people who argue, yes, this may happen, but the Chinese are no longer communist. They simply want to make money and be stable, and we can continue. It'll be a different governance, but we can continue and enjoy our lives still.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen, because for one thing, the United States is basically the brokest country in history. It's developed a model for national government in which it spends $4 trillion while only taking in $2 trillion. You cannot close that gap. By about the middle of this decade, and this is really the point of the book, it's about the urgency. None of this stuff is happening mid-century. It's happening now. And around 2015, the United States taxpayer will basically, just through interest payments on the debt, be covering the entire cost of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. You're a great scholar of history, Michael. You know as well as I do that there were periods during the sack of Rome when the barbarians showed up at the gates, and the government of the declining Roman Empire attempted to bribe him to go away by offering him sacks of gold and silver. But they didn't pick up the entire cost of the Visigoth military as a matter of policy, and they didn't tax Roman taxpayers to do it. So this is really unprecedented in history, in which one declining power funds the rise of its successor.
All right, guys, stay with us, Mark. When we come back, more, of course, of Mark Steyn. Welcome back to The Arena with Michael Coren, joined by Mark Steyn. Mark, welcome back to you. The book is After America, Get Ready for Armageddon. You mentioned about the Chinese army. I mean, it's almost beyond comprehension, being funded by the American taxpayer. How can we possibly escape from that, though? Because if we default, I assume there'll be enormous trouble, and we do owe this money, or the Americans do owe this money.
Well, it's fascinating. When I talk to my friends on the right, for example, who object to the downgrade, America was downgraded from its AAA credit rating just a couple of weeks ago. And it was fascinating to me, the reaction on the right, when you talk to people. They say, oh, but we can still cover the cost of the interest. And I go, well, look, you owe $15 trillion. And it's fascinating to me when you look in those guys' eyes. It doesn't really matter on the right or the left. They can't help but give away the basic reality that there's no plan to pay back this money, and therefore there is no intention to pay back this money. And I think what is at stake here is really the entire solvency of the Western world. I mean, ultimately, if you look at, say, the Greeks, every few weeks the Greeks go back to Angela Merkel and say, okay, we've run out of the last bailout, can you bail us out again? Greece can go to Germany. There's no one America can go to, because at this level of spending, you're basically outspending not just America, but you're outspending the entire planet. I mean, according to the official projections of US government spending by 2020, to fund the federal government of the United States will require the rest of the planet being willing to dump 20% of its GDP into US Treasury debt. That is simply not going to happen. So America has to do what Portugal has to do what Greece has to do what Germany has to do. It has to find return to a model of government that is far smaller and far more affordable, because otherwise the civilization that built the modern world is simply going to slide off the cliff, and the future will be outsourced to others.
That's not going to happen under a Democrat government, but it may not happen either under a Republican government. We have the Tea Party suggesting that we do need to trim enormously, but can they ever achieve, or can their people achieve vicariously, some sort of genuine influence in Washington?
Well, I think the people, or at least a portion of them, are a little ahead of both US political parties in this respect, and that's what means, that's what gives us something to play for in the United States. In Greece, for example, if you were a Greek businessman, you're being squeezed by the dependency class on the one hand and the government class on the other, and there's simply not enough left in between to prop up the other two. If you're a businessman in Athens with a terrific idea, the best thing you can do is go to your travel agent and buy a one-way plane ticket out of there to do it almost anywhere else on the planet. And I find it fascinating that we think it now entirely natural for huge numbers of people to be engaged in non-productive activity their entire lives. I mean, I was fascinated. I'm overseas at the moment, and so I chanced to be reading the obituaries of Jack Layton, for example, at one remove. Everybody in Jack Layton's life, including both his wives, his children, practically everyone he associates with, none of them has created a dime of private sector wealth in their entire lives. To fund what we might call the Jack Layton class, you have to have enough of a productive class in society to prop them up and to prop up the dependency class, and too many Western countries simply don't.
Last couple of minutes, I'm glad you mentioned Jack Layton, because the whole question and notion of censorship, what are you allowed to say? What you've just said, and I agree completely, but you know as well as I do, many people will be cringing. How could he say such a thing? The man is dead. I mean, over here right now, we're having these neurotic commemorations of a nice enough man, but really quite ordinary fellow. You've been the victim of censorship, so have I. Ann Coulter's on the show, Juan Williams, Tarek Fatah. They've all been victims of this. Are you allowed to write books like this and actually be heard?
I think so, because in the end, real reality trumps political reality. Ann Coulter will tell you that, and Juan Williams will tell you that, and Tarek Fatah will tell you that. That in the end, if you attempt to constrain public discourse, particularly at this particular time in history, when the agreed model of the Western elites since the Second World War is crashing down around our ears, whether it's manifested in the riots in Athens, the torching of London, the downgrading in Washington. These are all symptoms of the same thing, that the post-war Western state, concocted by elites of both left and soft right, is failing. It's coming down around our ears. The idea that this is a time to narrow the bounds of public discourse is completely preposterous. I rejoice in free speech. I've never wanted to. I'm confident that I can win the argument on the merits, and I'm willing to hear the other side. Too many people on the other side, including, by the way, Jack Layton's NDP, which was utterly useless on the free speech battles in Canada, to their shame. Jack Layton's NDP, too many people in that party and on that side of the spectrum simply don't think the other side should have a side at all, and that is no use to us in the times we live in.
You know, I know people, you know them too, who they read what you have to say, they respect you, they almost revere you, Mark. They say at one point they could always look to the US as a place to go for almost sanctuary, and that's now gone. What do we look to now? New Zealand, Luxembourg? I mean, where's the last place we can go to?
Well, people ask me that. Where could you go to? And obviously, you know, if you're extremely wealthy, you can go and hold up in Bermuda or wherever for as long as it lasts. But that's the reality. Is that when the US slides off the cliff, it's going to drag down most of the Western world with it. And that is why this is the hill to die on. That essentially Europe's decline was cushioned by the United States. Germany can afford to be Germany. Sweden can afford to be Sweden. Belgium can afford to be Belgium because America's, and Canada, by the way, can afford to be Canada because America's there guaranteeing continental defense. When the United States goes, there is no one to do the cushioning, and that's why it's important to take a stand for the solvency of the Western world right here, right now, before mid-decade kicks in. All
right. The book is After America, Get Ready for Armageddon. Mark Steyn is the author. You've got to buy copies because Mark needs a lot of money. It's a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so very much indeed.
Thanks a lot, Michael. And as I said, I look forward to being your 25th anniversary guest. Congratulations.
Thank you so very much. And now, America's greatest living blonde person and someone who has given more heart attacks to liberals than their habit of eating too much caviar and pate. Ann Coulter, welcome to you, my darling.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Now, the book, you're being as conciliatory as ever, Demonic, How the Liberal Mob is Endangering America. Is the liberal mob endangering America?
Well, right now it's endangering the entire globe. You know, I spent 2 years writing this book about mob uprisings, mob movements, how mobs work, how they affect a man in a crowd. And within 2 months of the book coming out, we have mob uprisings all over the globe, including in Vancouver, down here in Wisconsin. We have flash mobs running wild throughout this country, in Britain, in Greece, in Paris. I knew the mobs would come back. I didn't think it would be this soon. I must have a fantastic publicist.
Now, let's talk about Vancouver, because obviously we're a Canadian show. This was a bunch of drunken louts who had nothing better to do. They had money. They weren't poor. They weren't struggling. That's really the problem of liberalism, or just self-indulgence?
That is not exactly the sort of mob I talk about, similar to the flash mobs. That's more of criminal behavior, as you indicate. The mobs I write about, starting with the French Revolution, are political mobs. And by the way, an apolitical mob and a criminal mob are not always all that easily distinguishable. I mean, after the LA riots, the Democrats used that, which was also basically just a criminal mob, to push through all sorts of, idiotic social welfare programs and, this office and that office. They did manage to expand government massively in the wake of that. More what I am talking about is from the French Revolution to the Weathermen and the SDS in the 60s, to the Wisconsin public sector unions, the government workers, rioting, breaking windows at the Wisconsin State Capitol, going to legislators' homes, surrounding them, trampling on their flower beds. I mean, that is a form of domestic terrorism. It's not like 9/11, but it is intended to shock and frighten people. And all mobs, they always have the same characteristics. You can really never tell, what is your point? What is this about? Why are you doing this? Why, when bankers came to town in Seattle, about a decade ago, did a bunch of filthy animals run out on the street and start smashing Starbucks windows? And this is a form of behavior, and these are literal mobs we're talking about. I also cover more the sort of psychological mobs, which liberals are also susceptible to. But this using street protests that can get out of hand and can often end up in property destruction and physical violence. This is what liberals use and have since the French Revolution to grab more power for themselves, which is why they encourage things like class warfare and physical attacks on their political opponents. They encouraged massive redistribution of wealth so that you end up, as Britain is a little more advanced than we are in America in the welfare system, but you end up with all of these potential rioters who are just sitting home living off a federal dime for their entire lives.
Let me ask you something. This is a Canadian story. I don't expect you to know too much about it because we are only Canada, of course, but the leader of the opposition in this country, Jack Layton, he was a social democrat, a New Democrat. He was a decent guy, and I knew him quite well. He passed away from cancer, very sad. Now, all of us said it's a loss. He was a good Canadian, he wasn't a fanatic, and we regret his passing. But it's become a neurotic obsession now. You have to almost pray to Jack. We've removed God from society, and in its place we've put someone like Jack Layton. We had a columnist in this country who wrote a very moderate article saying, I think we're going a bit over the top. She's been threatened with death, the most foul and abusive language. If you don't buy into the mob adoration of Jack Layton, I'm not blaming him, by the way, then somehow you're a bad guy. So this is what you meant by psychological mob mentality.
Yes. I have a whole chapter on the mob's tendency to create messiahs. Even an intelligent man in the presence of a crowd will lose some of his intelligence and engage in similar and striking behaviors, and one of them is, mobs are obviously very susceptible to slogans, and they don't need to make any sense, like, you can't hug a child with nuclear arms. What does that mean? To a crowd, it seems to make perfect sense, these glib, superficially appealing remarks. They go from wild passions from one to the next. Rumors are extremely likely to take hold in a crowd, and I think it's chapter 2 of my book, mobs tend to turn their leaders into messiahs. They turn political figures into messiahs. We certainly see it in this country with going back to Andrew Jackson, the father of the Democratic Party. I have quotes from his biographer about how crowds would surround him as if he were their father and they his children. And most recently with Clinton and Obama. Both cases we have liberal female journalists writing about the phenomenon of women having sex dreams about the president. As much as Republicans liked Reagan, and they didn't like him that much when he was president, I mean, they were constantly criticizing him. He was certainly not he was our president, but it was more like Bush. He wasn't revered. He was being attacked all the time by conservatives. We've never had sex dreams about any of them. I promise you that. And your story on this Layton fellow reminds me. I have noticed the converse when prominent conservatives die. Even conservatives will leap out and make a point of saying, "Well, I didn't agree with everything Jerry Falwell said. Well, of course, Reagan had his problems. There was Iran-Contra." You almost have conservatives doing exactly the opposite. Can you, just on the day of his death, can you just talk about the things you liked about the conservative?
Look, I accept your point. As you were speaking, I was trying to think back of historical examples where I could contradict you. There aren't that many. But perhaps the Tea Party movement? I mean, Sarah Palin does not always speak as though she was Kierkegaard, yet people do adore her, don't they?
They do, but you notice she is not running for president yet. I mean, according to the polls I've seen, a majority of Tea Partiers do not support Sarah Palin for president. The passion for Sarah Palin is a little bit like the passion for Ron Paul. I mean, I loved Sarah Palin when she ran as vice president. I don't think she should run for president now. it's a small group of very passionate supporters, and that, you know, that can be anything. That can be a rock band or a sports group. You do not see that taking hold in any large numbers for Sarah Palin or Ron Paul, I might add. On the conservative side, we tend to attack our candidates more than idolize them.
The book is Demonic: How the Liberal Mob is Endangering America. And Coulter, you're an absolute legend, and you told me to say that. It's been a real joy. You take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My next guest may be, well, familiar to you. Tarek Fatah is an award-winning author and journalist, described recently as our leading jihadist hunter, whatever that is. He's also, by the way, a cancer survivor. Tarek, welcome back to you. And the first question is, you're still in a wheelchair.
Yes.
Lazy. But
lazy.
You're now cancer-free, right?
Yes, I am. It's in remission, and but the after effects of cancer are still there. The damage to my muscles and nerves in my legs has made me wheelchair bound, but not for long.
Not permanently, though.
It will take time, and I leave it to my doctors and physiotherapists. I'm not worried about it.
You're not going to leave it to God?
God is always there on my side,
really?
But he works through doctors and physiotherapists.
Now, there are lots of people, I mean, for those who aren't aware of you, and I'm sure there's one or two somewhere hiding, you've written, what, 2 now best-selling books. You've been an outspoken critic of Islamic fundamentalism, jihadism. You've been threatened with death many times, mostly by your wife, of course. You're a brave man. Are you a Muslim?
Yes, of course I am.
What does that mean? What does it mean to be a Muslim?
That means something very simple. That means believing in God as the divine creator of this universe and the galaxies, and believing that Muhammad was his messenger and that the Quran is the word of God. There are 5 duties assigned to a Muslim, all of which I have done. You have to perform your Hajj, you have to fast during the month of Ramadan to the best of your abilities, you have to pray, and you have to give a wealth tax. And I fulfilled all these items. I don't allow anyone to dictate between what is between me and my God.
The Quran, you mentioned the Quran.
Yes.
Now, I don't read Arabic. I've only read the Quran in translation. There are so many translations of the Quran. There is so much that is available. I'm not a fool. I understand that phraseology can be taken out of context. This is done with the Old Testament. But if we look at so many Islamic societies, their interpretation of the Quran is incredibly oppressive. It leads to minorities living a very difficult life. It leads to misogyny. It leads to crass, graphic homophobia. You reject all of this, and many Muslims say as a consequence, you're not really a Muslim.
Well, unfortunately, most Muslims have never read the Quran. 80% of them don't read Arabic. 50% of them have been illiterate. That's in the 21st and the 20th century.
What about those who do? There are many Muslims who do read Arabic. They read their Quran every day, and they still believe that you're a heretic.
Yeah, they believe in the Quran as if it was the prime property, as if it was a grand franchise given to them by God, and they flaunt it in a very racist manner, of the supremacy of Arabs over non-Arabs, over fair-skinned people, over black people, and the result of those are evident to us in Darfur, in southern Sudan, in Pakistan, among the Kurds, where Muslim on Muslim violence has killed tens of thousands of people, I would say even millions over the last 1,000 years.
Does Islam believe that you have the right to say what you're saying right now?
Absolutely.
It does?
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to show you something now, and this, we could get into some trouble by doing this, and we probably will in fact, but I want to show this, and hold this up to camera. Can we see that? This is the cartoon. It's blocking my head, which is a good thing. Okay, let's show, then we'll put it down here so we can see it for the whole time. This is a cartoon drawn by Kurt Vestergaard, and he's on the show, by the way, next week. Kurt Vestergaard is a Danish cartoonist. He's an anarchist. He's made fun of Christianity time and time again. Can I hold this up again, just so people can see it? There you go. Doesn't make me a very brave man. I'm merely a journalist. People were killed for this. They were decapitated, throats were cut, mass rioting threats. I've just shown that on national television. Does that make me a bad person? Does that make you a bad Muslim?
No, it doesn't. I'll tell you how I would react. I find that hurtful, not offensive.
Why does it hurt you?
Okay,
it's a drawing.
I understand. I'm just being honest with you. It's a drawing, and it's a bad drawing because he's taken a picture of the British soldiers of the First World War and made that caricature and said this is the Prophet Muhammad.
It's not meant to be that, though.
Irrespective of that.
Tarek.
Yes.
You know why this was drawn.
I understand the background. I'm telling you honestly how I feel. For me, Muhammad is my grandfather, my uncle, the person I grew up as a child.
Was he not violent? Did he not call for war?
Yes, he
was
did.
his personal, private, sexual life beyond reproach?
No, it can be discussed, and I've discussed it in my book.
There are people who are killed if they mention it in Islamic society.
Yes, there would be. If I was there in Pakistan, I would have been buried by now. I don't apologize for violence carried out in Islam's name. I'm just telling you that when somebody draws a caricature of Muhammad, I don't have a rational explanation, but as someone who was brought up in a society where images count a lot, maybe if I was born in Canada, I might not react the same way. But anyone killing in the name of Islam for this is a danger to our society.
The context of this, of course, was that an academic had been kidnapped and beaten up very badly, merely for reading the Quran, not in a pejorative sense, merely reading it to a class where there were some non-Muslims there.
Yes.
And then there was an illustrator who was frightened to illustrate a very supportive book about Muhammad.
Yes.
And in Denmark, where they hold their liberty dear, they said, we're going to test the limits of free speech. In Sweden, I'm going to hold another cartoon. I don't think this has ever been shown on TV before in this country. And this is by, let's hold it up to this camera here. This is by Lars Vilks, who we will have on the show as well in the future. We haven't got anything planned yet, but he will be here. I've interviewed him. He's a Swedish artist. Now, this is a picture of Muhammad, the head, allegedly, of Muhammad on a dog. Now, this video that we're going to see of riots that took place, he's been threatened with death, promised death. Vestergaard, of course, there was an attempt to kill him last Christmas. Merry Christmas, we're going to cut your head off.
Look, he has every right to.
Is that offensive?
Not offensive. Again, I would say hurtful to me, but I would never, ever criticize him for doing this. It is his right to do that.
And not according to the people in this video. This is in Sweden, the Swedish police. They're chanting Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar as they try to get to him, to kill him. He lives in fear. Vestergaard has constant security.
These are Islamofascists. These are the same young people who threatened me for writing a book that where I have endeavored to prove that the Prophet Muhammad was not a mass killer. But they are so imbibed in their hatred of the non-Muslim that they're offended that I suggested that the Prophet was not a mass murderer.
Tarek, fair enough, I understand where you're coming from, and so I admire and love you, but if it was a handful of lunatics, we could say they're not that important. Can you think of a...
They're not handful. Well, I agree with this is widespread.
Can you tell me an Islamic country, a country where Islam is the majority religion, where I could hold up this cartoon or this cartoon and leave the studio safely?
No.
No.
No. There are 50.
What does that say about Islam?
It doesn't say about Islam. What it suggests is that Islam and politics have been bound in such a way, and that is, we have never addressed that, and that's why I think 10 years after 9/11, we are worse off today than we were at on the day New York was attacked, because we still haven't had the guts to address Islamism or Islamofascism and say that we are a Western civilization, we are proud to be where we are, our roots go back to Europe, we are the children of Rousseau, Voltaire, there is a Judeo-Christian presence in how we have evolved as a Western society, and there is no denying that. We haven't come from the Ming dynasty, we haven't originated in the Abbasides of Iraq or Syria, we didn't come from the Gupta dynasty. Present Western civilization is a product of European Enlightenment. If people cannot say that, and I blame the mainstream...
Well, you know they can't. This showed the Arena, Sun News. None of this will be allowed, even in Turkey, Indonesia, Malaysia, the more allegedly moderate states with the Muslim majority.
They're not moderate. They are fairly economically developed. That is why people don't want to risk their economic well-being by erupting.
Tarek, may never see you again, because I could end up being a martyr of some sort of
No,
course.
you won't. I'm there in my wheelchair.
You're a great man. Bless you. Thank you so very much.
Take care.
Still ahead, the remarkable Juan Williams, who was fired from public broadcasting for daring to say something vaguely offensive to, yes, Muslims. And will the Japanese economy ever recover? After he was fired for having a moderate opinion, he found that he actually spoke for the vast majority of people. Juan Williams is a writer and a broadcaster I've admired for years, for goodness sake, and, well, this is quite the story. So, welcome to the arena.
My pleasure to be with you. Congratulations on the new show.
Thank you so much. The book is called Muzzle, The Assault on Honest Debate. Now, I read your biography of Thurgood Marshall, your work on the civil rights movement. I always thought of you as actually a rather liberal-minded guy, very much an academic in your studies. I was very impressed with your work. When I heard that you had been, what, fired, banished from National Public Radio, I was incredulous. Tell us the story, please.
Well, I mean, it's a very odd story because I was engaged in a debate, and the debate was about someone, a prominent talk show host here in the United States, Bill O'Reilly, who had said that Muslims attacked us on 9/11. And that had prompted some people to get angry with him, to walk off a set. He asked me then, he said, where did we go wrong? Where did I go wrong? What's wrong? I said, you know, I'm not going to play politically correct games with you, Bill. In fact, the people who attacked us on 9/11 were Muslims, and I went on to say, in fact, when I'm in airports, even now, 10 years after the fact, if I see people who are dressed in Muslim garb, first and foremost identifying themselves as Muslims, it makes me nervous. I then went on to say, you know, I don't want any policies enacted against people who are dressed in Muslim garb. I don't reach any stereotypical conclusions about Christians based on the behavior of Timothy McVeigh. And so it was a full-throated, honest debate. And subsequent to that, NPR said that because I admitted to this anxiety about people in Muslim dress, I was a bigot. And I deserved to be fired because I violated their journalistic standards. It was stunning to me because I didn't say it to be provocative. I wasn't trying to stir anybody's pot or offend anyone. I was just admitting to my own feeling, and I think it's a legitimate feeling.
I mean, let's put some context here to state the obvious. You're black, African-American. Yeah. You've written beautifully about the civil rights movement. You've been a victim of racism yourself. You were not saying anything anti-Muslim. You merely expressed your own honest opinion.
Correct. And so, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned the fact that I'm a black American, because then some of the critics came out, Michael, and they said things like, oh, what would you say if a white person admitted to being anxious, nervous, frightened as they were walking down the street and saw some young black men late at night dressed in hip-hop garb and talking loudly, behaving badly? You'd say they were racist, wouldn't you? And I said, well, no, I wouldn't. I'd say, you know what, if they're afraid, I understand it fully because I'd be afraid too.
Exactly.
And I would cross the street and I'd get at it. So I don't understand this. I mean, given the rate of black-on-black crime in the United States, you'd have to be, you know, dead in the mind not to have some degree of anxiety in that urban environment, in that situation. But again, this is the way that they sought to attack me. They wanted to put me in a box as a bad person for simply saying, listen, there's a real point of anxiety after 9/11 about terrorism in this world, and there's a legitimate linkage between extreme Islam and terrorism that we have to confront as we go forward. Even as in the United States we claim to be a land of religious liberty, we have to acknowledge that there is a problem here with extreme Islam and terrorism.
Well, of course. I mean, I've lived for a while in the Middle East, and there are many Muslims who are aware that there are extremists within Islam who they will avoid. I used to work in Northern Ireland. I knew many Irish Catholics who wouldn't go to certain areas and knew they were Republican. It's not about religion or race. It's about attitude and aggression. But this was National Public Radio. They wear their liberalism on their sleeve, yet they banished you because you were too, what, illiberal?
Well, you know, it's interesting. Illiberal, or to their mind, conservative. Why am I talking to conservatives? Why am I engaged in this conversation? It seemed illegitimate to them. I think that's the real subtext to what happened here, is that they just didn't like the idea that I was willing to engage people who were on the far right of the political spectrum and to treat them with respect and to try to join in a debate about ideas. And I thought it was a thoroughly legitimate exercise for a serious journalist, but they clearly differed.
Now, the book, I enjoyed it thoroughly, I have to say, because what you've done here in this book, Muzzle, you've gone to other issues, which perhaps you came across later on after your experience, and you realize there are all sorts of no-go areas in media, aren't there?
Oh my gosh, because there are now so many speech codes, so many acts of political correctness. You're not supposed to discuss anything, it seems to me. You know, if you think about it, there's so many political causes now, so many lobbying groups, advocacy groups who are trying to control the conversation because they all see it as critical to winning the debate and getting funding or preventing people from enacting policies that would not support their particular point of view, that we're not supposed to have discussions. So, for example, the Obama administration doesn't even talk about terrorism. Michael, instead they talk about something called man-made disasters because they say, oh, we don't want to offend anybody who might be Muslim and think we're talking. No, that's craziness. Or you think about it for a minute, if you have a problem with the war in Afghanistan or the war in Iraq, oh, then people on the right will say, oh, you know what, are you patriotic? Are you really with us or you're against us? And you think, oh, wait a second, I'm just arguing about the policies. Or recently in New York City, the playwright, the famous playwright, Tony Kushner, who's Jewish and a supporter of Israel, said, you know, I have some differences with Israeli policy, and that caused one of the major universities then to withdraw an offer to give him an honorary degree until it became clear to the public, wait a minute, Tony Kushner is a supporter of Israel. He's just having a legitimate conversation about political policies. Why would you withdraw? But again, these are all inhibitions now in our society that limit the ability to have an honest discussion, to say what's on your mind, to hear what the other person is saying, to interact. No, you're supposed to stay in your box over here. You're never supposed to vary. Anytime you get out of line, then you're subjected to being ostracized, to being censored, to being told to shut up, or, you know, in my case, fired by even an organization that prides itself on liberal tolerance. I think they demonstrated great inflexibility and rigidity.
I think they did. And I'm glad you mentioned that last anecdote, because although we see people on the left imposing probably most success with this censorship, it's not confined to that. But the book is called Muzzled, The Assault on Honest Debate. I advise everyone to buy lots of copies, but whatever you do, don't tell National Public Radio that you've purchased one, otherwise you'll be banished forever. Juan Williams, a real pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael, and again, good luck with the show.
Thank you. Emails, you're in charge, you have the power. First one, it's from my blog, Coren's Comment. This one is Zinger, I know. Ottawa, Ontario, not sure of the gender, or if there is one. Hey, Hooknose, I see Sun Jews, now has a half Jew as well as the full Jews, Levant, Adler and Lily. Oh, Brian is Scottish Catholic. I watched to see how the Zionist-controlled media run our lives. I hope they're paying you a lot of money to tell your lies. Well, that's, yes, Rabbi? Yes, Rabbi, will do. Can't answer that, I've been told, from Jerusalem, but the check is in the mail, and that's all that matters. Kathy R. at google.co. This is Regina, Saskatchewan, lovely town. I've followed you in print and on TV for years. I honestly believe you to be the most intelligent, witty, and informed person on Canadian TV. Good luck with the arena. Canada needs you. What a lovely person, and she's so right. Jack Layton, this is Jack Layton, rest in peace. Michael, some years ago I gave you a blurb for your book. I said I've always enjoyed enthusiastic and intelligent exchanges and explorations with Michael Coren, both on air and in print. As you start a new show, I'm happy to repeat those comments. Thank you, Jack, and as I say, rest in peace. Now, what's up? We've been telling you about this one. What's up with the Japanese economy? What's gone wrong? Let's have a look at this. Oy. Now, to think I have just purchased my third Toyota RAV4 and I watch Sony TV. This noble people have become... Problem is, the guy on the left, it looks a bit like me. All right, enough of that. We'll be bringing you these amusing and informative videos at the end of each show. That's the end of show number one. We've got some great people coming up for you. Look, I know some will say, oh, I'm offended. Well, actually, I'm quite pleased and glad if you are, but it's all about free speech, isn't it? So, great stuff to come. Keep on watching. Tell your friends. Until tomorrow, to you and everyone, take care, God bless, and goodbye.